The office smelled like carpet cleaner and reheated coffee, burnt sweet and stubborn. The fluorescent grid hummed that thin electric note that makes your molars ache if you let it. Night had poured itself down the windows and left only our reflections in the glass, a floor of people pretending to be alone. I had been at my desk since 6:14 a.m., the hour when the city still whispers. By 8:03, I had 3 new emails labeled urgent, and 1 calendar square that hadn't existed yesterday. 11C, 9:30 a.m. HR. The subject line was a blank field. My phone buzzed, and a text from a number I didn't have saved read, "Can you step down quietly? We can make this elegant." I stared at the words the way you look at your own name on a piece of mail that doesn't belong to you. Quietly. Elegant. I touched the side of my coffee cup and felt the heat gone only at the surface. Beneath, it would burn your tongue. My first thought, after the rush of blood that sounds like a train when it's your own head making the noise, was specific. 2.1. The number had lived in my notes for 14 days like a stone you keep in your pocket. Because it keeps you upright. $2.1 million. Not missing, moved, not lost, hidden in motion. The screen brightness pulsed as the building woke fully. Across the aisle, the interns took their seats like they were putting on shoes for a long walk. Someone laughed in the kitchen. A microwave door slammed. I lifted the folder from my bottom drawer and felt the weight of paper like a true thing in my hands. Inside, 3 invoices that looked like cousins, not siblings. 2 emails with subject lines that could pass for a lullaby. True up Q4, bridge to close, and a neat list in my handwriting. Dates, amounts, routing numbers, initials. On the tab, a name, Northline Field Services, LLC, a vendor. With an address that belonged to a mailbox store, a website with everything but a contact page, and a tax ID that matched a dissolved company in Wisconsin. At 9:12, my mother texted me a recipe for soup. "Don't forget the lemon at the end," she wrote. She always adds instructions at the end that make things taste like they were always meant to be cooked this way. I thought of her at our old kitchen table with the ledger she kept for the hardware store she ran when I was a kid. Head bent, pencil sharp enough to draw blood. She taught me to count out loud, then in my head, then in my bones. She once said, "If the numbers are quiet, listen harder." And I remember thinking that quiet doesn't mean small. I am the senior operations analyst at a company people recognize from billboards and Sunday football commercials. We sell machines that make other machines do what they say they'll do. My job is to keep the process honest. I don't run numbers, I listen to them. I sit in rooms with people who like to talk fast and decide if their stories have an echo in the ledger. I eat my lunch at my desk, because that's where the sunlight hits the table at the angle that warms your hands without making you sleepy. I'm the one they hand the hard pile to when they want it to stop being hard. 2 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday, a junior in accounts payable named Amaya stopped at my desk with a file balanced on her palm like a waiter with a tray of glasses. "Ms. Keene," she said quietly, because quiet in a loud place slips under the noise and gets where it's going. "This pattern makes me itch." She set down 3 invoices. Each was for $24,985, just below the threshold that triggers procurement's second signature. Each referenced a scope of work labeled Phase 1B. Each had a wire instruction to the same ABA number. She pointed to the timestamps in the approval log. 12:14 a.m., 12:14 a.m., 12:14 a.m. "What vendor does their approvals in the middle of the night?" she asked. "And why does 12:14 feel like a signature?" "Numbers don't flinch," she said then, almost to herself, and from that moment the sentence set up shop in my head and started brewing tea. I nodded, felt the stone in my pocket, and wrote a new word at the top of my notebook, Northline. The lever was the money. 2.1 men routed to Northline through a choreography of small steps meant to be invisible. Split invoices under $25,000 to avoid a second pair of eyes. Statements of work written in language that could apply to anything. Phase 1B, True Up, Bridge, codes you could overlay onto any program that needed a friend. The approvals logged at 12:14 a.m. weren't human habit. They were a script bundled into an automation task by someone who knew our system liked time more than people. 2 wires had gone out at 12:14 a.m. on the 14th of the last 2 months. The third was queued for Friday. The routing number traced to a regional bank in a state where we had no field offices, but where the brother-in-law of our CFO had registered a consultancy last year, Northline Advisory Partners. I can't tell you the moment the thread turned into a rope. It happens undramatically. A number repeats. A field that should change doesn't. Something that looked like cotton looks like bone. I sleep with a pencil by my bed because sometimes the thing that clicks does it in the dark. On the 6th night at 2:14 a.m., I woke with 3 words in my mouth: matched IP addresses. I rolled over, typed a note, fell back into a fast, small sleep, and dreamed of my mother's ledger, the pencil losing its point and finding it again. After Amaya's visit, the shift began. A standing meeting disappeared from my calendar with no cancellation notice. The Slack channel where we tracked vendor escalations reappeared minus my name. I got an Outlook prompt asking me to re-enter my credentials 3 times in a row and then politely suggested I contact IT. My keycard worked, but only on certain floors after 6 p.m., like the building was deciding for me when I was allowed to work. The new travel policy required VP sign-off before any site visit, with the VP out of office indefinitely. Little removals, the kind that let you gaslight yourself into believing you'd imagined your own place in rooms. On Thursday, HR sent me a document called Professional Transition Guidelines. The title used words like curate and harmonize. It came with a checklist that included return access token and mentor your successor. I didn't have a successor. The email had been CC'd to the CFO, a man named Graham Pierce whose suits always looked more expensive than the people wearing them and whose voice could stack words in a way that made you forget he'd taken your chair. I printed the guidelines and put them in my folder with the invoices and a new section labeled Artifacts. There, a screenshot of my calendar before and after, a PDF of the audit trail showing 12:14 a.m. approvals, a photo of the mailbox, store that served as Northline's address taken at lunch, the glass door reflecting a sky like cheap chrome, a copy of the vendor intake form where the tax ID had an extra 0 in the 5th position, the kind of mistake that means, this is not a mistake. Amaya kept dropping off small puzzles, a set of shipping receipts that didn't exist in the warehouse logs, 2 purchase orders with the same signature that had been pasted at the edge, pixel telltale clear as a flag when you enlarge the photo, a string of internal emails with subject lines that said, good to go, and bodies that said nothing. Each time she did, she said it again. Numbers don't flinch. It became our anchor line, something you can tie your boat to when the river looks like it's moving the wrong way. I didn't tell anyone I trusted more than the notebook. That's how it works at first. You make a house of paper on your desk and live in it for a while. I made a private inventory. 2.1 NEM across 9 invoices in 60 days, 3 wires at 12:14 a.m., 5 approvals by G. Pierce with IP addresses. That matched an office that was supposed to be empty at that hour. 1 vendor with a tax ID that belonged to a dead company. 1 brother-in-law with a name that liked to be helpful. 1 HR script that didn't fit my job title yet. The move was simple because the simple ones are the ones you can stand under if they fall. On day 14, I booked a room at 12:14 p.m. and titled the invite, Northline Review, Payment Hold. I sent it to the audit committee liaison, the outside counsel we pay to correct us when we talk too fast, and to HR, because they had asked for quiet and I had decided to give them silence full of facts. I did not include the CFO. I wrote a cover note that was human and not dramatic. It said, there appears to be an anomaly in vendor payments to Northline Field Services totaling $2.1 over the last 60 days. Attached are the artifacts that suggest policy breaches. I recommend a temporary hold on pending payments and a review. I'll bring the binder. I did 2 small things that mattered. I toggled a standard flag in our payment system that placed Northline in the exception queue, which pauses wires for 72 hours without fanfare. And I walked to security to update my emergency contact, because there are acts that rewrite the day, and it's good to be practical when you light a match. The guard behind the desk had a jar of peppermints and a way of looking at you that made you stand up straighter. You look like you're about to jump, he said. No, I answered. I'm about to land. At 9:30, HR asked me again to step down quietly. The room was glass and beige and meant to be used for people who needed to cry without anyone seeing them. The head of HR, a woman named Carla who wore silk-like armor, folded her hands. Rowan, she said, soft enough I wanted to hand it back with a cloth. This is a moment to calibrate expectations. Leadership feels your season has reached its natural close. Understood, I said. The word felt like a key turning. I wrote it down in my notebook to make it true. Then I asked, what time works best for audit committee materials today? It tilted her. She blinked, then recovered like a ballerina who slips and makes it look like a decision. We're not there, she said. This is about fit, not failure. Understood, I said again. The stone in my pocket grew smooth with my thumb. At 12:14, I set the binder on the table. The room was an interior one. No windows, thick door, a table big enough to make people feel small. The audit committee liaison sat at the head, an ex-CFO named Lyle, all knuckles and clarity. Outside counsel, a woman named Ruth, who didn't waste ink, clicked her pen once and left it clicked, a signal. Carla from HR had her laptop open to a document that wouldn't be needed. Amaya was there because I asked for her to be there. She'd found the first thread, and I believe in naming firsts. I opened the binder. The smell of toner is a kind of courage. I placed the invoices in a row. I slid the email strings beneath them like subtitles. I set the photo of the mailbox store on top like a book cover. This, I said, is Northline Field Services. Registered to a mailbox. These invoices are split to avoid dual approval. The approval times are 12:14 a.m., automated, with credentials tied to the CFO's profile. The routing number goes to a regional bank in, I named the state. Northline Advisory Partners, owned by the CFO's brother-in-law, shares the mailing address. Over the last 60 days, 2.1 matter has moved this way. A third wire was queued for Friday. It's now on hold in the exception queue. Who placed the hold? Lyle asked. I toggled the standard flag, I said. It's within my permission level. Ruth looked up then, and in her eyes I saw something settle. Numbers don't flinch, she said, not as a question. Amaya's mouth did a small smile. Carla shifted in her chair, smoothed her skirt, and said, Rowan, we're concerned about your tone. My tone is paper, I said, calm enough to hear the hum again. Paper remembers. The fallout began before we reached page 6. My phone lit up on the table like a child who wants to be picked up. Call, call, call. I turned it face down. When the meeting ended, there were 37 missed calls. 12 from Graham, 8 from Carla, 6 from a number I didn't recognize that traced. Back to a PR firm, 11 from people who used to send me emojis for team wins. Slack was a chorus of, hey, can we chat messages? My email had 3 calendar invitations, 2 for exit interview, 1 for informal coffee. Security knocked at my office door at 2:14, a gentle tap from a massive hand. Ms. Keene, the guard said, I'm told to collect your laptop. He looked sorry to be a person in a system. I gave him the spare, the one with the bad battery. I kept the binder under my arm like you hold a small animal that trusts you. I turned off my light and walked to the stairwell because I wanted to feel the building's throat as I went down. Concrete cool, the metal rail solid under my palm, the echo real. In the lobby, I sat on a bench and counted my own breaths. When I stood, the guard slid me a peppermint. Numbers don't lie, he said, misremembering in a way that made me like him more. The confrontation was the meeting I didn't call but attended anyway. 4 p.m., Glassroom 11C, the CFO and HR. No counsel. The glass walls made aquariums of us. People on the floor could see without hearing. We were a show with the sound off. Graham stood by the window, phone in hand, smile fitted wrong on his face. You've made a mistake, he said, and I admired the sentence for its ambition. Carla took a chair and crossed her legs like an ad for method. Rowan, we could have done this with grace. With grace, Graham echoed, then let the word drop its costume. Do you even know what Q4 costs? He said, voice soft, sharp. There's a way we do things. You were supposed to be a team player. There it was. The mask slip, not a confession in content, but in posture. The admission that the team had a shape I wasn't allowed to alter, that the team defined the truth, not the other way around. He set his phone face up on the table. The lock screen was a photograph of a boat on a lake so still it looked painted. He had a boat face. It made sense. "I'm not your team," I said. "I'm the ledger." "You toggle to hold," he said, ignoring my sentence like it wasn't in the language he spoke. "You went around process." "You wrote a process that only worked if no one looked at 12:14 a.m., I said. I looked. He took a step closer. Men like him think distance is a tool. Up close, you could see the effort it took to stay handsome. The jaw clenched, the smooth forehead, the light at his temple where hair had left early. "Do you know what an investigation does to a share price?" he said, and I heard the pleading under the threat. "Do you know what you've done?" "I've given the board something to hold," I said. "Numbers don't flinch." Carla leaned in. "We can still do this quietly," she said. "We can make it elegant." "Then do it," I said. "Elegance is a line that holds under weight." He exhaled then, a sound I'd hear later in my sleep because it was the moment he let go of the part of himself that tried. "You had a good run," he said, and in losing the mask he found himself ugly. "You could have stayed." "I could have stayed," I agreed. "But not the way you think." I left the glass room and walked into the hall where quiet looks like carpet and a potted plant settling into its shape. The next morning, the official emails dressed the day like a mannequin. The board has voted to initiate an independent review. The CFO has been placed on administrative leave. All vendor payments to Northline are suspended. Staff are reminded of their obligation to preserve records. The institution did what it knows how to do. It made boxes and put us in them. The reckoning came on a Tuesday at 12:14 p.m., in a room with a view of the river that looks better when you remember the river doesn't care about you. The audit committee met with counsel. HR sat with a notepad and no pen. I brought the binder, thinner now. Some pages replaced by receipts. A returned wire confirmation. A check for $210,000 marked restitution. Partial. An email from Northline. Advisory partners dissolving their LLC. A statement from the regional bank acknowledging a compliance review. Lyle cleared his throat. "Based on the findings," he said, "the committee has voted unanimously to terminate the CFO for cause, to refer the matter to the appropriate authorities for further review, and to seek full restitution of the 2.1 matter. We will also restructure the vendor approval process and appoint an interim controller to oversee remediation." "Who?" Carla asked, the pen appearing in her hand as if it had always been there. "Rowan," Lyle said simply, "on an interim basis, if she chooses." Silence does a special thing in a room like that. It thins the air so everyone breathes together whether they like each other or not. I looked at the river, then at the table, then at Amaya, who had been invited for this moment because I asked, and because she earned it. She didn't smile. She lifted her chin like you do when you think maybe you can see farther than you could yesterday. "I'll do it," I said. "On 3 conditions." I listed them like beads. 1. Reinstate multi-factor approvals for any spend over $10,000. 2. Publish the weekly exception queue to the entire operations team. Transparency is a vaccine. 3. Elevate Amaya to senior AP analyst and give her a budget to build a pattern library. Lyle nodded. Ruth wrote it down in the kind of handwriting that makes you feel safe. "Approved," she said. "And Rowan..." She paused, not for drama, but to choose accurately. "Numbers don't flinch." Carla looked smaller than she had in weeks. The light catching her silk showed the seams. "You timed that meeting yesterday to be theatrical," she said, finding a hill to die on that wouldn't cost her a title. 12:14? Really? "It's when the approvals hit," I said. "I thought the numbers would like it." The days after looked like work. That's the relief of consequence. It returns you to tasks. We revoked standing vendor approvals and re-verified ENs. We shrank the threshold that allowed quiet theft to happen in many small bites. We taught managers to read. We built a pattern library with Amaya's brain and my stubbornness. A little museum of bad habits. Split invoices, duplicated scopes, after midnight approvals, mailbox addresses, second cousins with consulting firms. We put the word exception in a place where everyone saw it and where it stopped being a shame and started being a tool. The outside part happened without me. A notice filed, some letters drafted. a conversation with people whose business is to notice when money falls into the wrong pockets. I wasn't the hero of that part. I was the person who had handed a square with weight to a table that could carry it. The CFO disappeared into a sentence with the words, "No comment." His boat probably sat on its trailer and looked at a driveway. I didn't care. Caring is a currency. I spent mine on the people still at our desks. The calls dropped from 37 to 14 to 2 to none. The Slack DMs changed from, "Hey, can we chat?" to, "Can I see the pattern library?" The guard at the door started saving me peppermints. My mother sent me a photo of the soup. "Don't forget the lemon at the end," she wrote again, and I added a wedge to the next day that made everything bright. On a Friday, when the office smelled like hand sanitizer and sugar from someone's birthday cake, I cleaned the top drawer of my desk the way you do after a storm ends and you have time to notice the dust. I found a chess knight at the back, a promotional trinket from a strategy offsite 2 years ago. It was cheap plastic, but it looked the part from a distance. Fierce, slightly turned, ready to move in an L that confuses people who don't play. I set it by my monitor, black against the pale wood, and liked the way it faced the door. The symbolic object wasn't the binder. It was my badge. On the day we received confirmation that the final $2.1 had been credited back to the right place, security punched a tiny hole in the top of my old badge and handed it to me as a keepsake, something they do for people who've seen a lot of doors and earned the right to carry one without it opening anything. I threaded it on a red ribbon and hung it on the hook by my desk. The hole made a small circle of absence that fit the tip of my finger. It wasn't pretty. It was honest. A month later, Amaya brought me a cup of tea at 12:14 and set it down on the right side of my notebook where the stone used to live. I didn't need the stone in my pocket anymore. "We caught a baby Northline," she said, eyes bright, not because a bad thing happened, but because we had caught it while it was still learning to walk. 14,985. Subject line, bridge. "Numbers don't flinch," I said, and the sentence felt like home now, not just a line you hang on to in flood. On certain nights, when I work late and the floor goes quiet and the grid hum is the baseline of the room, I sit with the chess knight and the badge and the binder now thin with only the summary page, a single sheet that reads, "Restitution confirmed, $2,100,000. I trace the numbers with my finger like they are a prayer someone taught me when I was small. I think about my mother with her ledger, and the way she always found the lemon at the end. I think about the line Carla asked for and how elegance turned out to be a boundary. I think about Graham's boat in its driveway, which I hope will one day learn to be useful as a planter. Sometimes I go to the stairwell and walk down to feel the building's throat again. Concrete, cool, the handrail true. In the lobby, the guard offers a peppermint. "Rough day?" he asks. "Good one," I say. Quiet. That first morning comes back to me in pieces. The smell of carpet cleaner and coffee, the text that asked for quiet, the way understood felt in my mouth like a promise I was making to myself. Not to step down, to step true. At 12:14, the day I set the binder on the table, someone in facilities must have changed a filter. The air in that room tasted clean. The paper lay steady. The numbers did what numbers do when you ask them without hurry and without fear. I go home late and open the windows even in winter because the city has a sound that lets your bones remember they're inside something alive. I write a new rule in the red notebook I keep by the door. Don't rush. Don't decorate. Do the work. Numbers don't flinch.